Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about literary criticism and theory. So we are not going to cover individual critics, but we are going to cover all the major criticism theories. So let's start. First and foremost, we have to know what do you mean by literary criticism and theory. So literary criticism is actually just a name. See, a criticism doesn't mean a negative term. It just means analysis of a work. That is the meaning of criticism. And then it is also used as a secondary source. So for example, if you're writing a book review, you are criticizing it. You're telling the good things and bad things, but that also becomes the secondary source as time goes by. So that's about the definition and the use. Why should we critic? Now, a deeper reference is that literary criticism is often referred to as a secondary source, but it's also used to analyze your primary work. This is used by people who want to use an expert opinion. So if you're telling your own opinions, it not be validated, but then you tell this author said like this person said like this about that, then it becomes valuable, and that's what most of the criticism is all about. For example, if I'm reading Shakespeare, but then I say Matthew Arnold said like this, then it's validated. So that's the use and definition of literary criticism. Okay, next we're talking about literary criticism theory. So what is that? It's like a glass or a lens. This is about theory. So why do I need theory? How will one say which is good work and which is bad work? Only by having a lot of lenses. If I have different lenses, so I look at the work in a different perspective. Those maybe we can name them as psychological, archetypal. They are the glasses as such. So meaning you're looking for different things within the text. That's the theory part of it. And another thing is criticism helps readers understand a text. So if I don't know anything about it, if I read the secondary source, I'll know about the reasons why it's written like that. What is the author relationship with this? What is he trying to explain? All these things we can learn through literary criticism and theory. So next, so what are the most common critical stances for literary theory? So these are the lenses, different kinds of lenses we have. So we're going to see all these now. First is the formalistic, and then is the biographical, and then we have historical or cultural theory, psychological, mythological, gender, and deconstruction. All these are the most common critical stances of literature that we have. And so we'll see one by one what are these. Okay, now to totally understand how this works, we have a wonderful example. If I explain this, I don't need to explain all the rest of that, so it'll be easier for you to understand. First, let's take an orange. So if I'm going to analyze this orange according to gender theory, what will it be? First, I'll ask such questions like, what possibilities are available to a woman who eats this orange? To a man, it will give a different perspective. That is gender theory actually. So if you're taking a work and I'm reading it, I will know whether how are the women treated in this, how are the men treated in this, how they are analyzed. That kind of thing is called the gender theory. Now the same orange we have, and we see, first we have seen the gender theory, and next we have formalism. So if I am reading about formalism, what shape and diameter is the orange? So basically formalism means the text, how it's rhymed, what kind of writing is that, what is the style, and all these things. So that is called formalism. Next we have Marxist theory. Marxist theory is basically economics. So who wants this orange? Who gets to eat it? So that kind of theory is called Marxist theory. Next one, orange, we'll see about the same example. Post-colonial theory. Post-colonial theory is simple. Who's this orange anyway? who took it away. So like Indian culture, when the British came, what kind of impact was there, and when they went, what kind of impact was there. That's basically postcolonial theory. And next we have the reader response theory. So if you're taking the orange, what does it taste like? What does the orange remind the reader of? That kind of ideas come. So that is reader response. It's basically how the reader feels or what they think about it. That's called reader response theory. And then we have psychological or psychoanalytical theory. This, you're thinking, I want the orange, what I get, and if any problem comes when I eat it, such kind of nothing happens, but it's all happening in the psychological realm. That's called psychological theory as such. So with the orange we can explain all this. Instead of orange, you put a book and a story there, you'll understand all the theories. Now let's get into detailed analysis of each criticism. First and foremost is the formalist criticism. Formalist reading basically focuses on symbol, metaphor, imagery, characterization, and so on. A formalist reading basically will not worry about the author, his biography, and all those. He'll just focus on the work as such, the text as such. It will not worry about anything else. So it considers the elements of plot, narrator, structure, etc. And it's also what you do most often in English literature. Mostly half the criticism will be formalistic criticism. So we don't need to bother about anything else. We just bother about the text, the plot, the narration, the structure. So that is called the formalist criticism. Next, for example, I won't get into detailed examples, but then this will give you an idea of what is written. A formalist reading, the Three Little Pigs story everyone's aware of. Now we just, in a formalistic theory or analysis, we'll think about the wolf. What does the wolf symbolize? And we'll see what kind of words they've used. I'll huff and I'll puff, that kind of things. Okay, so the final thing is happening. What is going to show, foreshadow, or we are talking about the dialogues, wolf's dialogue, how cunning he is and all that. So from an example, you can understand what formalistic theory really is. Next, it is the biographical criticism. This is very simple. So we are taking the author and reading it, so I understand his relationship with the book. So that is called biographical criticism. We can just examine the author's life, we can have a deeper understanding of his or her writings. For example, right, if a biographical reading of To Build a Fire by Jack London, this work. So if we see that work, London actually grew up in poverty and lived on the streets of San Francisco. So we understand why that work has so much of influence of San Francisco. Only when I know the biography, I can understand Jack London's book. This is exactly true of almost many historical works. And for very good example, we can take George Orwell's Animal Farm. Even though it's a fable, if I don't know Russian history, it would be very difficult for me to understand the great Orwell's book. So that is about biographical criticism. Next, we have completed three as formalistic, biographical, and now we are on to historical criticism. So historical criticism basically means it shows the critical viewpoints examining a text in relation to its historical or cultural background. So if I'm reading a text without the history or cultural background, it will be very difficult for us to understand. For example, if somebody is reading Malgudi Days and if they don't have any idea about South Indian culture, it would be difficult for them to understand. And also, you may examine a text's effect on history or culture or vice versa. Yeah, it's like the other way around. Knowing history, then reading the text, and also reading the text and then going to the history. A historical cultural analysis are often very similar to a biographical analysis, and it's possible to view history, culture, and biography in a single essay. Of course, you can put all three together, almost similar, but there are some differences, and we can understand that. So next, this is an example. If I'm seeing Sleeping Beauty in a historical cultural background, we'll understand 1950s, what kind of society it was, how do they treat women, all kinds of that. So next, let's get to psychological criticism. So the father of psychological criticism is obviously Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is the pioneer of psychological criticism because of his wonderful book Interpretation of Dreams. So that's psychological criticism. Now, first and foremost, some things you should know about it. We will take most of the characters in a novel or a play and we'll analyze the characters. But one should understand, like, uh, as a writer, everyone's got a psyche. So when they write, obviously the characters will also have a psychology behind it. When we analyze that, it becomes psychological criticism. First, some basic stuff, that is psychological criticism, which deals with three things. That's according to Freud: id, ego, and superego. Id is the animal nature. It's like whatever we want to do it, like sexual nature and all this. But ego is the reality. It's like we measure, okay, which is good and which is not good, rational decision maker. But the superego is the conscience that tells you what's right or wrong. So that's id, ego, and superego. These are the ways human behavior is governed. Next, another psychological term, Oedipus complex. This, every boy is unconsciously attracted to the mother, so there is a rivalry between father and son. And the same way daughters are unconsciously desires for the dad, so they have a rivalry within mothers. So this is Oedipus complex and Electra complex. First of all, where do we get all these things? By reading texts. So of course these complexes have their origins in literature and mythology. Of course reading them brings us all these complexes. But you should also understand psychological criticism is a way to understand characters, not diagnose them. We are not psychiatrists. We don't sit and diagnose characters, but we just try to understand them through psychological criticism. And next, for example, if I'm taking Macbeth, why does Macbeth kill Duncan? Even Shakespeare wouldn't have thought about it, but when a psychological approach is put into place, we understand that because King Duncan is unconsciously a figure of father figure, so Macbeth feels threatened by it. The same way, Macbeth, by the end of the play, has given himself completely to the id, the animal nature, and has lost his ego. So that is about psychological understanding of it. And next, we go to the mythological criticism. In this criticism, this is not about mythology, but a slight variation of archetypal literature as well. So all the cultures, some things are common, like so literature gives meanings. If I read any cultural text, any epic, anything, we can find lots of similarities in that. For example, so first and foremost in mythology we have archetypes. Archetypes are universal elements present in the literature of all cultures. So it's present in almost every culture. Northrop Frye, wonderful book, Anatomy of Criticism, talks about this. He talks about spring, autumn, winter, and winter he connects it to satire and summer, romance, and all these things. So he takes the seasons and gives it all the feelings. That's archetypes. And next we have one example. Like if you take, for example, archetype of betrayal, you can see it in almost every text. From Judeo-Christian, we can see Jesus getting betrayed, and in Roman culture, we see Julius Caesar getting betrayed. So all these motives are there in almost all literature. So this is mythological criticism, the most basic form. And for example, if you see these common archetypes, hero, Spider-Man, Luke Skywalker, Beowulf, Braveheart, all these are hero figures. Outcasts and Cain, Macbeth's clown, all these people are outcasts in literature. And there is also a mythological journey that's called the quest. For For example, in a Lord of the Rings, one can see the quest going and reaching something. And so these are all the common archetypes one can see in mythological criticism. Then we have sacrificial kings, and we have evil personified. So that's about mythological criticism. So we've seen many types of criticism now. We have seen archetypal, formalistic, psychological, mythological, and all these criticisms. Next, we go on to gender criticism. Gender criticism, very simple. Gender criticism analyzes literature through the lens of socially constructed gender roles. What men should do, what women should do. And if I'm reading a text, I will say this ought to be done by men, this ought to be done by women. And basically the largest part of gender criticism is, of course, feminism, but feminism has its own place. In its most basic form, feminism is about equality. So let's talk about gender criticism more. The problem is now we have LGBT community coming up, so that's also added in that. There's an issue about gender criticism there. And next, for example, if I'm reading a feminist reading of any work, Cinderella for example, what happened? Is Cinderella supposed to be that girl who washes dishes and whole life is to wait for a Prince Charming to save her and finally she's happy? Is that the case? No, she could have done with her own life. That is also a feminist point of view. Wasn't she beautiful? Did she want a prince? Did she want to be like normal person? So and what about the other sisters? They are ugly, they are greedy and all this. Does that make them bad? So these kind of things are done in feminist reading generally. The next, we have the Marxist criticism. This basically is because of Karl Marx's work. So Karl Marx's work, of course, influences Marxist theorem and criticism. What basically is about economics mostly. For example, it deals with, are the rich always good or bad? If you're rich, are you going to be good? Or if you're poor, are you going to be good and bad or good or bad? That's the questions. And also minority majority, who rules who, that kind of question. So who has the power and who doesn't have, and how do they manipulate? All these things come when we are putting in Marxist view. And literature is essentially political. It either supports or refutes economic oppression. That's what it does. And then, so these are some of the basic ideas of Marxist criticism. Next, you should understand that all these criticisms, you don't need to pick one criticism and do it. You can pick any criticism and you can analyze anything, and it doesn't matter if you're a woman, you're hard to do feminist criticism, feminist criticism. It's not necessary. Anyone can choose any criticism and analyze it. So that's about it. Next, more literary theories are there, and that's one of them is deconstructionist theory. It's very easy. This is by Derrida. The thing is, if I'm saying something, is it the complete truth? Can I tell complete meaning of it, or there is something? Is language, according to Derrida, language is insufficient to tell the complete meaning. So it's always relative. If I tell a truth, it's not full truth, it's partial truth. That's the meaning of it. So every text, therefore, has multiple valid meanings because the reader may interpret the words differently than the writer intended them. All these things come about the deconstruction, and from the word itself we can understand much. Criticism is about construction. This is what the meaning is. Deconstruction emphasizes the breakdown of any meaning within a text because of the variety of different readers. According to different readers, the meanings will change, and that is deconstruction in the simplest form. For example, see, this is Clinton talking about his affair, and he says it depends on what the meaning of the word is. So here is might change meaning, and so will the consequence of it. Next, we have this idea that because there is no concrete meaning of anything, there is no single truth applicable to all human beings. So there cannot be absolute truths. Hence, everything is relative. That deconstruction for you. For example, the tortoise and the hare. When somebody reads, what about the sound? Hare and hare. They'll check this, and also they'll see that symbol of honor, because a hare goes slowly but it wins, whereas the rabbit slept. So, did it win? No. The tortoise won. Next, we have new criticism. New criticism basically is a relation to formalism. So, meaning resides completely in the text. The author, reader, everyone is thrown away. And the famous book New Criticism by John Crow Ransom was the basic one. So, text or may contain numerous messages, must have a unifying central theme. That's the main idea there. Text are artistic creations, and so if we closely read, it can be critically analyzed. So this is new criticism as such, but definitely the aware impact of formalism. It's not only one approach, there are multiple approaches here. And then we come to reader response criticism. Mostly it was in the side of the critics, the writer, and what kind of meaning should be made. But now we have to talk about reader and what their response is. Somebody is reading, as we have seen in the orange thing, what is the meaning of the text. So the reader is the essential person to have opinions on their own. What kind of taste? Do they like it? Do they not like it? So analysis should be on the reader's part. So that's what reader's response criticism is. They analyze the features of the text that shape and guide a reader's reading. Emphasize recursive reading, rereading for new interpretation. When you reread something again and again, you get new reading experience. And next, reader response theory has been criticized as being overly impersonal. So if it makes you like feel emotional or anything, you might tend to tell this is good. If you don't feel emotional or something, you might tend to tell it's not so good. So these are all reader response criticism. These attacks resulted in adaptation of reader response criticism called reception theory. So all these problems went on to be another theory called reception theory. So in truth, a text truth is relative. Readers may reach the same conclusion about a work but approach the task quite differently. This is the example of it. Next, reader response reception theory also is applied to general reading public rather than an individual reader. Each generation has different experience, values, issues. So according to generational reading, it changes. Therefore, each generation will read a work differently. If I'm reading maybe ancient works, I'm going to have a different approach to it. And next, we have structuralism. So structuralism is kind of formalism but more advanced. The meaning resides in the structure of language, not in art nor in the reader's mind. This throws away formalism out of the box. It talks only about structure of language. So it's a very scientific approach to criticism. It's a logical science system that deals mostly with linguistics. So two levels of language, langue, the King's English and everyday speech. So all these linguistic things will be done here. So they'll interpret a text by taking language apart, word derivation, sentence, syntax, and all those things. Next, as we have already seen, biographical criticism, it analyzes the author's life and how it impacted the work and how a work impacts the writer. This kind of biographical thing. Social criticism, this will be the last criticism. Social criticism maintains that the literary work cannot be separated from the social context in which it was created. For example, a German writer during Nazi time, when he writes, obviously there's going to be impact of Nazism there. So socially, if I criticize, I'll understand what's happening there. So the applicability of a given work, fiction especially in studying the dynamics of a given society. So if I'm reading Chaucer's work, I can understand maybe 15th century Chaucer. Next, what are the types of social criticism? One is feminist criticism and Marxist criticism. We've already seen feminist criticism and Marxist criticism. So, feminist criticism basically grew out of the women's movement that followed in World War II, and feminist critics analyzed the role of gender in works of literature. So they think which is very important. So feminist critique, the analysis works by male authors, especially in the depiction of women's writing. That is feminist critique. That can be male authors, and they will read male authors and how they have treated women. That will be the approach. Kind criticism is the study of women's writing. And next we have feminist critics have been responsible for recurring neglected works by women authors. They have discovered many famous writers, women writers, because those days men were the only one who were writing and women were not. So what is feminist criticism's points? So meaning is socially constructed for them. Texts have more than one interpretation. Truth is relative. And for them, sex and gender topics are very important. And so, Marxist, we have already seen, it deals with class. And new historism is another thing that one should know about. So basically it's historical viewpoints. New historist critics view literature as part of history. So a literary writer is basically telling a historical thing but adding his own ideas and storyline to it. So when I read a text, I will have an historical background to it. For works that tell us something about the surrounding ideology, slavery, rights of women, study of the ideology tells us something about the work. So historical works can be read like that. It takes two forms: work in the context in which it was created and work in the context in which it was critically evaluated. So there are 2 points for new historism. So according to new historist, literature does not exist outside time and place and cannot be interpreted with the reference to the era in which it was written. For them, time and place and literature should be all put together. That's the meaning of new historism. And readers are influenced by their culture, so no objective reading of a work is possible. So I should have some idea of history to really understand the work. So that's the point. As we have seen already. And so these are all the theories we have seen. These are repeating ones. So we have seen all of that. So sociological, biographical, structural, reader's response, formalism, new criticism, deconstruction. Then we have Marxist criticism, gender criticism, mythological criticism, psychological criticism, and finally we have formalistic criticism. So these are some of the criticism. These are the basic ideas. These are the different lenses we have talked about today. Of course, now LGBT core theory and all these things have come. In the next lesson, we'll follow those. And so we can apply these lenses to understand text. In the next video, we can see about each famous critic. Right, starting from maybe Aristotle onwards to F.R. Lewis, T.S. Eliot, and all these writers. Thank you so much.